So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Center for Armenian Studies here at Michigan. My name is Gottfried Hagen. I'm the director of the center. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here. Before we start, let me say for those who aren't regulars to our events and those out on the internet, that the Center for Armenian Studies is the third part of Armenian Studies here next to the two endowed chairs. It has been funded by the community here to scaffold the work of our Armenian professorships in terms of organizing events, supporting our graduate students, reaching out to the community. And we're very grateful for all the support we have received over the years. And maybe I can say that I hope that this will continue also in times when funding for universities federally is under imminent and dire threat. That being said, I have the pleasure to introduce to you Ken Schull, who is a professor of Middle Eastern history at the University of State University of New York, Binghamton. Kent did his graduate work at UCLA with a work on prisons, and so this is how most Ottomanists used to know him, right? The person who wrote the foundational book on the Ottoman prison system and criminal justice. And I didn't think there was anything sort of connection to Armenian studies there. And last year I was at a workshop at Binghamton, which was very enjoyable. And Kent was mentioning that he was working on something new with an Armenian component in it. And I was like, what? I did not know that anything like this existed. And I've seen sort of a lot of other people sort of having a similar expression on their face since then, including on Sunday when Ken presented part of his research at the St. John Armenian Church over in Southfield. So, but that's also why I had no hesitation, whatever, to say to Ken, you got to come over here to Michigan and tell us more about this. And so that's why he's here. The talk is called the Mormon Colony Scheme in the Late Ottoman Empire. And I'll let him take over. Please welcome me, join me in welcoming Ken Schull. Well,
thank you very much, Gottfried. I want to express my heartfelt thanks to the Center for Armenian Studies here at the University of Michigan, particularly for Viken, who has been such a generous host and getting everything prepared for me to come. This is really exciting. This is actually my first visit to the University of Michigan. I've never been here before, so it's really quite exciting. And I appreciate you, those online and those here, to take the time out of a beautiful, gorgeous day to come inside to listen to my current research. So I really do. It does not escape me how big of a sacrifice it is to be inside right now because I'm from upstate New York and we've had the same winter you've had here. So when it's this nice, why are you inside? That's all I can say. But I'm very grateful that you would take the time to come and listen to me talk about a fun project that I really quite literally just stumbled into. In 2014. I was invited to Brigham Young University, which is the university sponsored by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons, to talk about World War I in the Middle East and the centenary of it. And when I went there, I talked about a major, how important it was to the creation of the modern Middle East, how devastating it was to various populations across the Middle East, particularly the Armenian population, the Armenian genocide. And I had a professor come up to me afterwards. His name is Jim Taranto, and he's a professor of Islamic studies and Arabic at at Brigham Young University. He just recently retired. And he said, you know something about the Ottoman Empire, and you know something about Armenians. Did you know the Mormon Church had missionaries there in the Ottoman Empire? And I said, I had no idea. And he's going, well, in BYU Special Collections, the several of the missionaries have deposited their journals, because for Mormon doctrine, Mormon theology, family history and journal writing and these types of things are incredibly important. And so they had the journals of several of the missionaries there, the most prominent ones, some I'll talk about today. And he wrote me into this project as to co-author a book with him. Let's see if this is on. Okay, this just came out this past summer. Missionary in the Middle East: The Journals of Joseph Wilford Booth. It's a critical edition of a thematic selection of his journal entries. He kept a daily journal while he was a missionary in the Middle East for 17 years. And so it's an incredible resource. We're talking 600,000 words, about 1,200 pages, transcribed, typed. That's what we did. We transcribed it, typed, critically annotated it, but nobody's going to publish, 1,200 pages anymore. So we had to do a thematic selection out of it. And this is, for me, and I got hooked. So this is the first of 3 books that I will write on this topic. The one I'm required to finish here by the end of my sabbatical this semester or the summer is a biography of Booth while he was a missionary in the Middle East. It's for Richard Whitman's and his series in Routledge about, was it personal narratives in the Ottoman Empire. So it's that's the second book, and then the third one I really want to focus on are the Armenian converts, because those converts left behind lots of family records as well, which is wonderful, because these folks, it's very rare that you get working class voices from central Anatolia and what is today northern Syria, from the middle of the 19th century, especially women's voices. And I have several of these family histories and personal journals, narratives, these types of things, to be able to really enrich the study. I also have slews of Mormon missionary journals as well. So while the Mormon gaze, the Mormon Western gaze, is a little different from your normal Protestant Western gaze for the other missionaries that were in the Middle East, it's still a Western gaze. And I'm much more interested in the voices of the Armenians themselves, why they converted, what was their experience, and the influences upon them and how they influenced the world around them, their experiences. So I want to start off with a quote by Joseph Booth, which in 1928, 2 months before he died, he was in Aleppo at this point in time, he wrote this pithy little saying to kind of summarize his time and the experience, or the plight of the Armenian converts to Mormonism. And he says, our past and present status may be briefly told by counting up to 10. Thus, one lady missionary, that's his wife, Reba Booth, who was with him for 13 out of the 17 years, I believe he was there in there. 2 workers in the field today, meaning 2 missionaries, he and Reba. 3 cities have served as our headquarters. That would have been Aintab, Aleppo, and Haifa. 4 elders have died in the field, meaning 4 of the elders is the title that male Mormon missionaries carry. Elder so-and-so, Elder Sorensen, or something like that would be how that goes. And so 4 of them had died. He was soon to be the 5th. 6 languages, 5 nationalities have been baptized. 6 languages are needed to teach them. 7 apostles have been here. Mormon hierarchy in their church, they believe in the 12 apostles, like in Jesus's time. And 8 cities now claim 1 or more of our members, and 9 out of 10 are in poverty. And that's what I want to focus in on, is this issue of the 9 out of 10 of poverty. So this presentation focuses on the struggles faced by the LDS Armenian community. LDS is short for Latter-day Saint. I'll use that interchangeably with Mormon, back and forth, Latter-day Saint, that type of thing. Particularly in terms of providing for their basic needs, necessities during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. and the community's attempt to ameliorate these dire circumstances. Deeply impoverished due to awful economic circumstances within the broader Ottoman Empire, but also exacerbated by persecution from the Ottoman government and local Armenians, the LDS Armenian community and its missionary leaders attempted various schemes such as carpet weaving, textile manufacture, agriculture, and several abortive attempts to establish a Mormon colony in the Holy Land. This presentation investigates these attempts at self-sufficiency and communalism within the context of growing Western imperialism in the Middle East, and how this intersected with the millenarial aspirations of the Mormon missionaries and their Protestant competitors at this point in time. So I'm going to first give a really kind of brief overview of Mormons and missionary efforts in the Ottoman Empire. I want to discuss the framework, a couple of frameworks for what I'm trying to deal with in this while discussing the Mormon Armenian community. And the first is something I've coined called compounding marginalization, basically Mormon Armenian experience in the late Ottoman Empire, and I'll explain that in more detail. Then I want to situate their attempts to ameliorate their dire economic circumstances within the framework of disaster capitalism, particularly in the post-Hamidian massacre era, in which 300,000, it's estimated 300,000 Armenians were killed by Hamidian irregular forces, primarily Kurdish light cavalry in eastern Anatolia at this time. And then talk about their various attempts to alleviate this poverty in this era of disaster capitalism, and then the Mormon Colony scheme. And that's how I'll kind of end up with how they were trying to do this. And if I have enough time, I'll talk about their self-declared exodus from Aintab to Aleppo post-World War I, where when Joseph Booth came back after the war as an agent of the Near East Relief Mission to see who was left of the Mormon Armenian community. It's estimated between a third and half of the Mormon Armenian community was wiped out as a result of the genocide, and he made a conscious decision to, in the midst of the so-called Turkish War of Independence and other things, to remove the community that was in Aintab to Aleppo, to French mandate Aleppo, as a way of protecting the community moving forward. So I probably won't have that much time to go into that part, but now you have a little bit of it. So, but from there, so I want to give a very brief overview of what, so similar to American Protestant missionaries, Mormon missionaries entered the Middle East during the first half of the 19th century, whence the Ottoman Middle East became a focus of intense missionary activity. As early as 1820, Protestant missionaries were toiling in what they envisioned as the Holy Lands, right? Palestine, Syria, Turkey, and Egypt, that have significance to biblical history, in hopes of bringing to fruition their millenarian hopes of Jesus Christ's return to the earth. By the end of the century, there were Protestant churches, schools, colleges, hospitals, and even colonies scattered throughout the region. Having a prominent role in Christian history, doctrine, and eschatology, the Middle East was also a focus of intense interest to Mormons from the earliest days of their history. So soon after its establishment in 1830, the LDS leadership began exploring ways to carry their message of what they call a restored gospel of Jesus Christ to Palestine. Joseph Smith Jr., the founder of the LDS Church and first prophet, sent Orson Hyde, one of the LDS 12 apostles, to Jerusalem to dedicate the land for the ingathering of Abraham's children, especially the Jews, in preparation for the second coming of Jesus and for the commencement of missionary work. Orson Hyde offered a dedicatory prayer on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem in 1841, but it wasn't until more than 40 years later when those missionary labors officially began by the Mormon Church. The first sustained Mormon missionary efforts in the Middle East were initiated in Anatolia. On December 31st, 1884, Elder Jacob Spory, the first full-time Mormon missionary in the Middle East, arrived in Constantinople to open the Turkish mission. He had been sent from the European mission in response to a letter written by an Ottoman-Armenian man, Hagop Vartugian, who suggested the LDS missionaries would find a fertile field to proselyte in the empire. Many people would think, well, how in the world did anybody in the Ottoman Empire know about Mormons at this point in time? Well, quite interesting. You go to the Ottoman press and you find mentions of Mormonism quite a bit, particularly because of Mormonism's unusual practices of polygamy. I came across quite a debate in the Ottoman press about which version of polygamy was more virtuous, the Islamic or the Mormon. And of course, the Islamic won out in any of those discussions. But so this is the Mormons were known all over the world and even in the Ottoman Empire at this point in time. So less than a week later, on January 4th, Spory baptized Vartugian and his family, the first LDS Armenian converts in the new mission. And in subsequent years, finding little success among Ottoman Muslims, Jews, or European Christians in Constantinople, the missionaries decided to move inland and began gradually to establish Mormon congregations, or branches as they're called, in heavily populated Armenian areas in Anatolia and northern Syria. So this is where converts to Mormonism, primarily Armenian, all of these cities during this time period from 1884 to 1928, somebody was baptized, somebody converted to Mormonism in those cities. But the main four branches were Zara in the province of Sivas, Maraş, and Aintab in the province of Aleppo at this point in time, and then also in Aleppo. So those were the main congregations. Now, we're not talking about a large number. We're talking not more than 300 at any one time. Okay, so we're not talking thousands or huge waves of converts. So this is a micro history in this way, but it gets us into much broader discussions about issues of ethnicity, religion, conversion, Western missionaries and Western imperialism in the area, and also immigration, particularly Armenian immigration from the region to Utah, converts. So through this lens, you can see a lot of different issues going on. And that's how I like to do history, is look at something small and see how it fits into broader issues, as small as a prison cell, for one thing. And as I'm not making comparisons between prison cells and Mormonism. Don't get me wrong there. Okay, I don't mean that. Just my former interests. So Ferdinand Hinsey, this individual right here, right? He was one of the early stalwart missionaries for the Mormon Church in the Ottoman Empire, often referred to as the father of the Armenian mission. He labored over many years to preach the Mormon gospel and to solidify the church's presence among the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. He served as president of the Turkish mission when Joseph Booth first arrived as a missionary in 1898, and over the years worked dedicatedly to assist their converts in any way possible to help provide for themselves, get legal redress, become faithful in Mormon religious practices, and even immigrate to the United States. Hinsey even translated, or he's given credit to translate, the Book of Mormon into Armeno-Turkish to help further missionary efforts among the Ottoman-Armenian community. So this was published in 1905 in Boston and shipped to the Ottoman Empire in 1906, was kept under lock and key in Alexandretta by the Ottoman customs officials until 1908, when it was finally released with the Young Turk Revolution. So it's an interesting story in and of itself. But Aintab eventually became the largest branch in the mission, and until 1907, when the mission headquarters was moved to Aleppo, it was the center of the LDS Church activity and administration in the empire. The membership of the Turkish mission, which never exceeded 300 registered members at any one time, comprised mainly of Armenians from central and southern Anatolia and northern Syria. The Turkish mission was closed in 1895 when the political conflict and mass violence of the Hamidian massacres in the Ottoman Empire threatened the LDS members and missionaries, but it was reopened in 1897. Soon thereafter, in 1898, Joseph Booth was called as a missionary. So these are some of the missionaries. This is Anthon Lund, who was an apostle in the Mormon Church, who came in 1897 to reopen the mission with Hinsey when he came back. This is Hagop Gagosian. He was one of the early converts in Zara to Mormonism. He's got an interesting story in and of itself. He was a member of the oh my goodness, not the Dashnaks, the Hunjaks. Thank you. I just completely blanked. He was a member of the Hunjaks. And when he converted to Mormonism, he felt that that was incongruent with his new belief system. So he wanted to leave, and he had a price put on his head by the Hunjaks. And so he had to leave in the middle of the night, not even telling his family, to escape Zara, and went to the United States for a couple of years, and then came back under a different name, under a different pretext in 1897 with Anthon Lund and Hinsey to restart reopen the mission, so to speak. This is Booth, Joseph Booth and Reba Booth. These are the missionaries that served in the Ottoman Empire in 1909, when the mission closed again because of the Adana massacres, because of the Greek-Ottoman War, and because of the counter-coup, and obviously the reinstatement of the 1876 Constitution and the Young Turk Revolution, all those types of things. They closed it down in 1909. So this was the most missionaries that ever served at one time in the Mormon missionaries in the Ottoman Empire. So we're not talking a huge group. So basically from 1884 until 1952, when the Mormon missions in the Middle East closed down permanently, until this day, basically, there's about 80 missionaries that ever went to the Middle East to serve. So we're not talking a large group. So Booth served for 17 years in the Ottoman Empire, basically during a 30-year period, 1898 to 1928. And by this time, there were 3 active congregations in the church in the Ottoman Empire, and 1 district, as they called it. So Zara, Maraş, Aintab, and Aleppo, as I said, were missionary activity, where there was missionary activity, regular, where they worked and they proselyted. So the members, once the mission closed again in 1909, it didn't reopen again until 1921. So for that period of time, the members, the Armenian converts to Mormonism, were on their own without any direct leadership from Utah during that period until Booth came back in 1921. When he came back and serving a second time as president of the mission was renamed the Armenian Mission. For obvious reasons, the Turkish mission was over. The Ottoman Empire was on its way out. And they basically moved the headquarters to Aleppo in French Mandate Syria. As I said, Booth returned as part of the Near East relief efforts to assist Armenians and other Christians after the war. And he found that nearly a half of the LDS Armenian members had died as a result of the violence, mass atrocities, and deprivations of the Great War. Soon after Booth's return, he then, as I had mentioned before, he quickly gathered the remaining survivors in Aintab, which was part of the sphere of influence according to the Treaty of Sèvres, 1920 Treaty of Sèvres, that was under French influence, but there were, with the Turkish War of Independence going on, the Greek-Ottoman War at that point in time, and the battles that were being waged between the remaining Ottoman forces and the French imperial forces, right? France withdrew from those areas of Cilicia into French Mandate Syria, and Booth thought it would be safer for the remnants of the community, the Mormon Armenian community, to be there. For the next 7 years, President Booth, joined by his wife Reba Booth in 1924, sought primarily to deal with the aftermath of the devastating war and genocide, helping to alleviate the suffering of the saints. That's a term used for those who convert to Mormonism. That's why it's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Everybody who joins is considered a saint, not in the Catholic sense, but yeah, and rebuild their lives. So in December 1928, Booth died of cardiac arrest while working with the members in Aleppo, and was buried in the evangelical section of the Armenian cemetery there. In 2006, James Toronto, my co-author, he actually got funds and went to the cemetery and restored the graves, because Another Mormon missionary who died was buried there too in Booth, and then they restored the graves. Nobody's been back since because of the Syrian Civil War. So who knows the state of the graves at this point in time. So with Booth's death, the Armenian mission was intermittently opened and closed, with name changes to reflect the political dynamics and conflicts of the post-Ottoman Middle East. It was called the Palestine-Syrian Mission up until 1948, and then it was called the Near East Mission after that, until its permanent closure in 1951 and subsequent immigration of its mainly Armenian community that was in Aleppo at that point in time to Utah, Beirut, Lebanon, and Soviet Armenia. Many of their descendants still live in Utah and surrounding states today, and in total, an estimated 80 LDS missionaries served in the Middle East from 1884 to 1951. So, notwithstanding the promises made by the Tanzimat decrees, especially the 1856 Islahat Fermanah, regarding religious freedom and the ability to exercise it freely regardless of confessional identity, Mormons in the Ottoman Empire faced severe limitations of their religious freedoms and were at times supported and even advocated for by the United States, other Western missionaries, the broader Armenian community and clergy, and local Ottoman officials. I argue that the status of Mormons and their Armenian converts in the late Ottoman Empire is best understood within the framework of what I call, compounding marginalization at the international, imperial, regional, and local levels. In the United States, Mormons were extremely marginalized at this time as a distinct religious community known for their controversial religious practices and beliefs, such as continuing revelation from God. There's a living prophet today, new scripture that they introduced to the Christian canon, the Book of Mormon, one of them, and also obviously plural marriage, as is called in Mormonism, or polygamy, as the rest of the world knows it. In the United States, they were in the Ottoman Empire, Mormon missionaries were marginalized by other Western missionaries, local Christian clergies, the Ottoman administration, and by members of the Armenian community. Armenians were obviously a marginalized ethno-religious community in the late Ottoman Empire, and Mormon Armenians were doubly marginalized by the broader Armenian community and clergy. These intersecting degrees of compounding marginality greatly affected the LDS Armenian community's ability to gain legal recognition. Hinsey and Booth, they both petitioned to get millet status in the Ottoman Empire, which the Ottomans were like, "You're Christians, right? Well, you're Protestants, aren't you? Yeah, isn't that enough?" And they're like, "No, we're different." Which that's how Mormonism sees itself, as very distinct, not part of the Protestant tradition, but a restoration religion, meaning a restoration of what they call the fullness of the everlasting gospel of Jesus Christ. That Christianity at the time had gone away from. In my mind, there's a lot of similarities with Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad's message, and the idea of restoration of the truth, that Jews and Christians had gone away from that, and this was to bring it back. There's some similarities with Mormonism that way. These intersecting degrees of compounding marginality greatly affected the Armenian community's ability to gain legal recognition, practice their faith, move about the empire, immigrate, gain redress in the face of discrimination and persecution, and provide for themselves and their families. In fact, compounding marginalization helps to uncover and make more explicit the multiple layers, meaning local, regional, imperial, and international, of influence and interaction that affected non-Muslim views, navigation, and experiences in the late Ottoman legal system during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So compounding marginalization is deeply indebted to Kimberly Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality, but it does seek to include other categories of marginalization in addition to gender and race, such as ethno-religious identity, class, citizenship, and community identity, in order to understand how these categories compound to further marginalize already marginal groups, especially in terms of their legal status and access to justice and freedoms supposedly provided by them through the rule of law. Mormon missionaries and their Armenian converts experienced compounding legal marginalization in the late Ottoman Empire. Most Western missionaries, Protestant and Catholic, viewed the LDS counterparts with suspicion and contempt, as heretics, as apostate, as beyond the pale. with what they're talking about. Not only were LDS missionaries the competitors for converts among the Christian populations of the Ottoman Middle East, but Mormonism was seen as a heretical perversion of Christianity that peddled apostate teachings, particularly polygamy, belief in a living prophet, and continuing divine revelation, and additional sacred scripture to the Bible. Second, many Western missionaries were consciously working to further the imperialist interests of their home countries, be it Great Britain, France, or the United States within the Middle East, and they enjoyed immense political and diplomatic support by their home governments, as Osama Makdisi and others have written about and shown. Many have. LDS missionaries, however, were extremely marginalized by the United States and therefore had minimal extraterritorial support from their country of citizenship. In fact, in 1879, I believe William Everett, who was Secretary of State at the time of the United States, sent out the Everett Circular, which went to all of his counterparts around the world, including the Ottomans, stating that please watch out for the Mormon missionaries, the agents, as they call them. They're a crime syndicate, and they're there to kidnap your daughters and sisters and bring them to Utah to enter into their harems. It was please thwart them, please stop them, and don't let those who convert immigrate to the United States. We don't want them. So the United States, the famous Chinese Exclusion Act, many of you have heard of, actually was also not just for Asians, but for Mormons, because there's a polygamist phrase in there as well, that to prevent polygamy from coming in to the United States. They didn't want more Mormon converts coming in. So it got to the point where Mormons under U.S. racial categorization were designated as Asiatic whites because of the practice of polygamy. And so it's, even though the vast majority of their converts were from Western Europe, right? We're talking England, Scandinavia, Central Europe, the Netherlands, these types of places. So it's quite interesting. Finally, combined with the fact that Armenians were already extremely marginalized as a whole within broader Ottoman society, being Mormon Armenian exacerbated the already tenuous situation, especially within the broader Ottoman Armenian community. Mormon missionaries, and especially their Armenian converts, were often met with disdain, persecution, hostility, and outright violence at the hands of their extended families, Armenian civil and religious leaders, Protestant missionaries, and the community at large. Missionary journals and LDS Armenian writings also attest to this persecution. Converts such as Zadok Moses Aposhian, who was a wealthy Oriental rug manufacturer from Zara, lost his business when he joined the church. He claims that suppliers stopped selling him materials and wholesalers stopped purchasing his finished products for export. Mormon missionaries were also attacked and stoned by members of the broader Aintab Armenian community when they attempted to preach there. Joseph Booth was one of them. Additionally, Armenians who converted to Mormonism often lost their jobs, were ostracized by the broader Armenian community. Their children were expelled from local Armenian schools or Protestant missionary schools, and they were often attacked when attempting to gather and worship. This discrimination was also manifest when LDS Armenians attempted to immigrate from their hometowns to the United States through outright attempts at obstruction, stealing their goods and property, not paying the market price or market value for their goods, and robbing them along their trip, and not availing the same types of support that other Armenian immigrants would receive along the way, such as these immigration networks that they have, these migration networks. If it was found out that they were Mormon, they did not have access to the supports that were in Alexandria in Egypt, per se, or Athens or other places at that time. So additionally, local Armenian clergy and Western missionaries often spread falsehoods about the LDS converts and reported them to Ottoman authorities, accusing them of perverse behavior, like as wild animals, criminal activity, and seditious activity against the Ottoman state, accusing them of operating a human trafficking and smuggling type of ring. So this is, I think it's important to understand that this is how I'm trying to help us understand the Mormon Armenian component here within the broader experience of Armenians in the late Ottoman Empire, but also embedded within the relationships between the different Western missionaries. The Mormon missionaries didn't have recourse to the American consulates in the same way as other Protestant American missionaries did from the ABC FM or other groups. So I already talked about Booth's characterization of 9 out of 10 are in poverty. I want to talk about what this is. This is disaster capitalism, right? What is it? This phrase was coined, as far as I know, by Naomi Klein in her The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism. It's not, it's not lost on me the publication date of what went on in 2007, 2008 in the United States. But this is the definition: the exploitation of natural or man-made disasters, such as catastrophic weather events, war, epidemics, etc., in service of capitalist interess, the practice of using unstable social, political, and economic situations to impose or benefit from deregulation, the privatization of public assets, etc. Now, Tolga Jora has utilized this framework to talk about the rise of the creation of the Oriental carpet industry in Central and Eastern Anatolia post-Hamidian massacres. I highly recommend his article here, The Market as a Means of Post-Violence Recovery, Armenians and the Oriental Carpets in the Late Ottoman Empire. He argues that in the wake of the Hamidian massacres, the Protestant missionaries turned entrepreneurs created a lot of carpet making factories to help, ostensibly, at least at first, to provide for the devastated Armenian communities, to work, to harness some of their skills and to be able to move their goods to market to benefit the community. But over time, he sees this shift to, it wasn't just Armenians, but Muslims, Kurds, other groups could be hired on. And then there started to be, how can we depress wages to maximize profits, to provide for our missions, these types of situations. It's a very compelling argument. And so one of the ways that, and he provides this wonderful map of where the carpet industries and missionary activities coincided, along with the violence of the Hamidian massacres, right? And so you have the old regions in the west of carpet industry moving east, and it coincides quite nicely with the main centers of where the Mormon congregations are. And so utilizing what Tolga Jora has done, and thinking about the Mormons in this context as well, because in 1897, the Mormons came back, the missionaries came back to reestablish the Turkish mission at the time, and their congregations were facing the same types of deprivations, if not worse, as the broader Armenian community was. And so what they did was decided to harness most of the converts, the early converts to the Mormon Church, Armenian converts, were weavers, were textile makers, were lace producers, and they had those skills, but they had lost their jobs, right? And so one of the schemes that, and I don't mean scheme in a bad way, I just mean this is one of their ways to devise it, I'm not trying to use it pejoratively, was to sell to was to get the converts to create carpets and lace, and to sell them to the ZCMI, Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution, which was created in Utah by Mormon producers for Mormons. The Mormons had to flee the United States to Mexican territory because of persecution in the 1840s, after Joseph Smith was murdered, and to go out to Mexican territory at this point in time in Utah. And this was founded in 1868, just at the time when the United States was, after the Mexican-American War, they had conquered those territories and taken them from Mexico, Utah, one of them. They sent out an army, Johnson's army, in 1868 to subdue the Mormons, right, at this point in time. So you had Mormon businesses banding together to prevent price gouging and exploitation in the face of the U.S. government's discrimination here. And the goods produced by Mormons for Mormons. It was like one of the first department stores in the United States, actually, the ZCMI. And so this was a cooperative, right? It's not, while the Mormon carpet industry, if you can call it that, it wasn't that large, obviously, in the Ottoman Empire, was selling directly to ZCMI. There was no middle person this way. So it was much more of a cooperative. So they helped to avoid some of the worst exploitative issues associated with capitalism and how this happened to other Armenian communities in the carpet boom industry in the post-Hamidian Ottoman Empire. And so we're not talking thousands of carpets or that type of stuff. But we're talking about a way to be able to, it's set within the disaster capitalist scheme, because where did the missionaries and the converts get their ideas from? Well, the surrounding environment. But because they were excluded from the broader capitalist networks, they couldn't work in the factories. They couldn't even own a factory. These are little like cottage industry types of things. This became less exploitative, so to speak, and I stress less. And most of the money comes back. The vast majority of it comes back to the producers themselves, right? And so, in some ways, the carpet industry, this scheme, was in parallel with the disaster capitalist side, but because of their marginalization, they were saved from the worst types of exploitation with it. I don't know what's better or what's worse, right? I'll leave it to others to decide in that regard. But it's interesting as I've found the account books that Booth kept about the carpet sold, produced, where the money was going, who was getting paid, these types of things. It's quite meticulous. I have to do a lot more work on it, but it is really quite interesting to see how this is in context with the broader process of disaster capitalism at this time, right? In the same areas, Aleppo, Aintab, up in Sivas, where Zara is right near there. This Maraş even, right? But they couldn't access the same capitalist networks, shipping, supply chains, that type of situation that the rest of the Armenian and Protestant missionary community could. And it was meager, but it was really quite interesting. And so this is a picture of the branch in Zara Sivas. This isn't all the membership, but this is quite a bit. This is Zara Kaposhian, who I was telling you about, who was the Oriental rug dealer. And this is Hagop Gagoshian, the Hunjak turned Mormon individual. This is the LDS branch in Aleppo in 1905. And this is the one in 1907, a picture of them in Aintab, displaying one of the carpets that they made to show off, type of a situation. Yeah, it's an interesting way. They also tried to alleviate the poverty in other ways, such as renting orchards and working on those to try and sell dried fruits and nuts and other types of things. They produced lace like this. This is found in the LDS History Museum, the Mormon Church History Museum in Salt Lake City. These are a carpet and a quilt that were made, produced by the Armenians. This is the prophets of the Mormon Church up until that date, until I'm forgetting the date. This is the 1920s. This was a quilt made to commemorate the LDS, the Mormon pioneer trek, their exodus from Illinois to Utah long ago. So these are held within the Church History Museum in Salt Lake City. Another way they tried to alleviate the poverty was through establishing a Mormon colony. Hinsey and Booth and other missionaries were enthralled with the idea of going to the Holy Land and reestablishing, this place for the gathering of the Jews and their dream was to convert Jews to, in the end of days, these types of things. Hinsey and Anthon Lund had gone back in 1897 to reopen the church with the idea of establishing a Mormon colony. This would be a place where the Mormon Armenians could escape the persecution, gather together in one spot, and do these types of economic practices that we're talking about to have some safety. The context of this is that in 1887, the Edmunds-Tucker Act in the United States basically had disenfranchised the church, Mormon Church, and confiscated a lot of its properties because of polygamy, and ended the practice of what was called the Perpetual Immigration Fund by the Mormon Church, which was at that point in time when they'd send missionaries overseas, they would encourage the converts to gather to Zion, to come to Utah, the Great Basin area, and gather in that area. But when the Edmunds-Tucker Act came about, they ended that practice. They confiscated the properties. There was no more gathering to Zion. And so that's part of the context for the Mormon colony scheme. We need to set something up for them where they're at, not to tell them to come here, so to speak. It's also based off of Mormon settlements across the Western United States, Canada, and Mexico. So in the Great Basin area of the Mountain West, primarily under Brigham Young, the successor to the Mormon Church of Joseph Smith, they sent these new converts who immigrated to settle areas around the Great Basin, set up Mormon colonies, basically. And also there were several that were in southern Canada, in Alberta area, they're still there today, and in northern Mexico that are still there today. They were recently in the news a couple of years ago. They got attacked by some of the drug cartels. There were some deaths there. These types of these settlements here, but they're all across the Western United States primarily. And so this is not a new scheme. It's also different from what we're thinking of Western imperialism at this time too, which is interesting. It fits within it, kind of like the disaster capitalism, but it isn't quite like that. And so what they do is they have this first attempt in 1897 and 98 when they reopen the Turkish mission. Hinsi, Lund, and Gagosian come back to the Middle East, to the Ottoman Empire, and attempt to find some land in the Holy Land. It didn't have to be in Jerusalem, that type of thing, to try and set up a Mormon colony. They had found some property, they had funding to do it, but Hinsi scuttled the whole thing because of Ottoman laws. The land couldn't be registered in his name. And he was a bit of a shyster, right? So he wanted to kind of hold things to himself. He wasn't allowed to by Ottoman law. They were going to put this in Hagop Gagosian's name, and Hinsi scuttled it, squashed it, so it didn't work. But the dream of it was continued by Joseph Booth until his death in 1928. When he came back as a Near East relief missionary agent, he attempted to find property. It's all through his journals. You can see this, where he's trying to find 2,000 acres somewhere to rent or purchase. It never worked out for them. They did idealize the Moshavot by early Zionists in Palestine region. Also the German Templars colony, the American colony that's still there in Jerusalem to this day. These types of things were in their mind, but they also had their own history as Mormons of this idea of planting colonies someplace else of their own people. And so it's this microcosm, this micro history of something, to see these broader trends kind of as the exception that proves the rule in some ways. It's quite different from other Protestant missionary efforts and how closely intertwined they are with Western imperialism. You have this whole process of Western missionaries turning humanitarian relief agents. Booth is like that in this situation. The whole notion of carpet manufacturing and feeding a Western market for these things. You see these parallels, but they're unique and they're different because of their status in this situation. And I think it's important to understand this as this context. And it's interesting to me for those reasons. And so in conclusion, right? Mormon attempts to alleviate poverty among its Armenian converts in the late Ottoman and post-Ottoman Middle East included carpet weaving, agricultural efforts, immigration to the United States, which we didn't get a chance to talk about, and attempts to establish a Mormon colony after 1897. With the exception of immigration, these attempts all failed, with Booth declaring just before his death in 1928 that 9 out of 10 converts live in poverty. While these efforts to alleviate poverty should be understood within the broader context of disaster capitalism in the late Ottoman Empire, wherein Protestant missionaries had attempted to alleviate Armenian suffering within the post-Hamidian massacres era, the Mormon context is unique due to their experience as a doubly marginalized community. While being spared the worst of capitalist exploitation and the inability to create a colony, some Armenian converts who immigrated to the U.S., namely Hagop Gagosian, who took part in the first attempt to found a Mormon colony and later immigrated to the US in 1910 permanently, claimed that its failure to establish a Mormon colony was actually a blessing in disguise. He wrote in his autobiography that if the church had succeeded in creating the colony, then perhaps so many Armenian converts would not have immigrated to the US, and therefore more would have suffered annihilation during World War I. Thanks very much.
Are there still Mormon Armenians in Aleppo right now? And what has happened to them?
No, there are not. Most of them, when the Mormon mission, the Near East mission, as it was called, was closed down in 1951, 1952. Most immigrated to Beirut, Lebanon, where there is still a small Mormon community, Mormon Armenian community in Beirut, Soviet Armenia, or to the United States. But as far as we know, there aren't any in Aleppo.
What's happened to them in Soviet Armenia? Are they persecuted there?
I haven't followed that far. I kind of stopped at the end of the Ottoman Empire. But what I have found, that is something I'm interested in. But I don't have those answers for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Oh, how many coups had been happening in Syria at that point in time? As my advisor Jim Gelman said, one damn coup after another type of situation at that point in time. It was pretty unstable. Obviously, it was called the Palestine-Syrian Mission up until 1948. The headquarters were actually in Haifa at that point in time, and then it was moved to Beirut, where it remained. There was still an active branch there in Beirut for a long time, and there are still Mormon converts there to this day, but very small in numbers. Most of the Mormon community there are expats from the United States who are working in various areas there, but there are some locals who have converted. Yeah, please. How's
It's
that?
a great talk.
Oh, thanks. That's very kind of you.
First one is about the press. So you mentioned that there were like news about Mormons.
Yeah.
Press. Like what kind of press was it? Like
Servet Fanoon, actually.
What kind of authors?
Yeah, the first one I came across mentioning Mormons was actually at the Junda program in 2002. Yeah, where one of the newspaper articles we had to read talked about, the Mormons and polygamy, and there was a little bit of poetry. It was a article that was taken from the French press, translated into Ottoman, and some poetry was stuffed in the middle about these lecherous Mormon men go and lusting after local women type of a situation. So that was from 1850s actually. So yeah, so quite early. I mean, Mormonism was all over the world because of their what's this strange religion from the United States coming type of situation.
So another question I had was like, were there Armenians who immigrated to the US and then became Mormons? Like, I don't know if it's a part of the research.
That's not part of my research, but I do know I stumbled across some of the early immigrants who came into Utah, turning around and being called as missionaries to go to the Armenian community in Fresno to try and convert them in the United States. So I don't know if they had much success. I couldn't tell you, but perhaps. I mean, some of the memoirs that I found are written by descendants of the converts who are no longer active Mormons or have left the church too. So you have you have an array. Not everyone stayed faithful, so to speak, to Mormonism either.
And like something selfish about my research. Like I never came across like Mormons immigrating.
There's not very many of them.
Yeah. If they were subject to another treatment, or maybe because of their like size, they were into like really object of surveillance.
So what if we go back to this? So Zadok Aposyan, I don't have the Palavchian, and another family, the Aurelians, immigrated in 1908 to the United States. And in Booth's journal, he writes, and in their writings, they talk about they're in Zara, and they go to Sivas. Let me get this map here. They go to Sivas, right, to renounce their citizenship and get their papers at Terki Tebiat. They do. It's in there. They're to renounce that, and then they start on this journey. They come down. They come down to Aintab and Aleppo. They leave through Alexandretta, go down to Alexandria, to Athens, to you go through the regular immigration regime, get checked for trachoma and all those types of Asiatic diseases that were imposed upon folks from Asia, coming through. And they came to the United States, but they went through that. As during their process, they were actually reported on by some of their local Armenian community in Zara, and they were arrested. The men were, and put in prison on their way out. And Booth and Shepard, another one of the Mormon missionaries at that, had to work to get them out and then move them on their way. So yes, they were subject to a similar regime, but there's so few in number. I'm not surprised you haven't run across them yet, I guess is the thing.
That's what I want to add. There's two, yeah.
I would like to insert a couple of questions.
Sure,
from
please.
Our online audience. So one is just a comment from Antoine Darjanian saying fascinating. As you know, in present day Armenia, there's considerable LDS church activities.
Yeah.
And then the colleagues at the Nasser Library are asking if you could please share again the title of the book on Mormon in Armenian that was shown earlier.
Oh, yes. Let's see. So this is Armeno-Turkish. It is Mormon Kitab.
Mormon Kitab.
Yeah.
Yeah. In Armeno-Turkish.
No, I think this was what.
Yeah. But if you want,
Mormon one.
there's the book that I wrote.
Yep.
Yeah. Another book.
And then the question is from Emma Abagian. Thanks for the amazing talk. Did conversion to Mormonism help Armenian converts survive while also causing them to lose their cultural identity? Could they have kept their Armenian identity, or was assimilation unavoidable?
Yeah. Let me just write that down and I'll come back to it. So, yes, working in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, their church history library, which is their archive in Salt Lake, ran into a lot of folks that, I was a missionary in Armenia. I went to Armenia and as senior missionaries. So after they're retired, they go as a couple. So oftentimes humanitarian or educational, but also then younger proselyting missionaries too. I'd run into folks and they always wanted to chew my ear off about Armenia, which was great. I'm like, I'm not talking about that Armenian. I'm talking about something, in the Ottoman Empire. But it was always really interesting to see that because it continues, right? And they pull out all their pictures and want to show me everything that they, it was really quite passionate about that. In Armenia today, the church has a larger presence. I did run into some converts to Mormonism in contemporary Armenia who had immigrated to the United States and then talked with them about their experience, but it's a little different, right? It's not the Ottoman period. So yes, the notion of assimilation, I'm working through this, trying to figure this out, right? It's placed within the context of broader immigration experiences to the United States, where first, second, third generation, by the third generation, almost complete assimilation. If the United States laws and culture allow complete assimilation, that's often what happens with immigrant communities in the United States. The Mormon Armenian, I didn't see as that different in this regard. The first generations that came over, those who came over in the late 1890s into the 1910s and 1920s, they often intermarried, right? The Sharinian, the Khazarian married each other. You had the Gagosian marrying the Shilhagopian, these different groups, right? Often in the first, but then subsequent generations, they're marrying Smiths and Jones and McDonald's and other folks. But I can tell you that there's so many people I've just run into haphazardly in Utah while I'm doing my research who say, I'm 1/12 Armenian. They know this because of their own family history. So it's a double-edged sword. There's this notion to assimilate Mormon ways into the truth and to the truth of their religion, their practices as they see it in those customs. But there's also a strong need to remember their roots at the same time, right? So I can't tell you how many times I've been talked to. I'm 1/12 Armenian. I go from the Schurinian, in the Schurinian, folks who are some of the archivists in the church archives, their sister-in-law is married to, a descendant of one of the families. And they got me some of the great journals that I have now from these folks. So yes, there is a general assimilation that happens, but they also do keep this identity in some ways. It's important in that regard. So it's a double-edged sword in some ways. It kind of fits with the broader U.S. immigration process, but because of unique practices within Mormonism, it's really important for them to remember their at least genealogy and their family history also. So, I don't have a perfect answer to that. Yes, please.
I have two questions, and one of them is kind of piggybacking on that. As a form of imperialism, missionizing, did they missionize?
Who's they?
The Mormons
okay.
Went there. Were they using English as a form of did they go using their language? Did they go and I don't know how those?
No. I think I understand what you're saying.
Did they use English? Did they make them learn English? And were their services conducted in English, or were they using the language of the land?
They use the language of the land.
Okay.
So they came and learned. So Booth, Hinsey, others learned Turkish, Armenian, and Arabic. They wrote poems, really bad poems, Armeno-Turkish in their journals and stuff. We'll put it that way. But they were able to converse in it, and it took time. I mean, he was there for 17 years over a 30-year period. He learned it. Not all the missionaries served that long, obviously, but you see in their journals, they're doing language study every day. They're struggling with it, trying to learn how to do it. And then they're writing in it. They're trying to learn the local vernaculars and publishing missionary tracts and other pamphlets and stuff in Armeno-Turkish, primarily, that type of situation. So
with the goal of immigration, was there a goal to teach them English so that they could go, or teach them French, or so that they can move out of those cases?
Yeah, so sometimes they would trade lessons, English lessons for Turkish lessons, Armenian lessons with local population. They could never set up schools or hospitals or other things because they didn't have the recognized status like other Protestants had. So they never had those types of situations. They were able to open a school, I think, in 1902 for about 3 months, and then it was closed down. So they just didn't have that ability. So Hagop Gagosian, right? He eventually learned English, but he wrote his memoir, his diary, in Armeno-Turkish, and it was his I think grandson or granddaughter who translated it, right, into English. So yes, they had to try and learn English too, but it wasn't in the way of going and we're here to spread American value. Yes, in some ways, right? I mean, you can't help it. In some, Booth is very proud to be an American, right? 4th of July, he talks about going to the U.S. consulate in Alexandria and reading the papers about why isn't the American flag being hoisted today? These types of things, but he also wasn't that supported by the United States either. He was in this kind of transition period. So, yeah, I hope, did that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah.
Please. The what?
Fully Mormon or fully, Armenian, practicing? Were there people who, participated in both at the same time? Or was it you really have to choose?
So, Booth's journals are so rich because it's over such a long period of time and it's daily. He talks about different practices. He talks about this to me, from my vantage point in the 21st century, it seems almost comical, but I think he was sincere in the time, talking about how oppressively patriarchal Armenian society was to women, trying to get them to speak in different meetings, right, in worship, these types of things. and this is coming from somebody who Booth had aspired to be a polygamist at one point. So, there seems some incongruity there, perhaps, but from his perspective, there's definitely some needs for changing the way society worked, but also there was, as I'm reading, a distinct kind of Mormon Orientalism towards the Eastern Christians in some reviews. I guess in Mormonism, they think they feel they have all the truth. So everybody's wrong except for them. So there's a bit of chauvinism that comes into that, regardless of what religious tradition you're in. But they do talk about the celebrating the water festival each year, where they're going out and getting doused with water in the arena. These types of things are wonderful. They're not trying to stamp those out. They're not trying to make them Utah Mormons, but there's certain practices that they're supposed to not engage in, right? At this point in time when Booth first went there, the Mormon dietary restrictions were not full-on commandments at that point. So, Booth abstained from drinking beer unless there was nothing else to drink, or coffee or tea or those types of things. But it wasn't hard, fast doctrine like it is today in Mormonism. And so, he would talk about people giving that up, but he wasn't forcing people to give that up, if that makes sense. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Yeah. They were, seen by their Armenian communities, like, oh yeah, they still went to church with them, but then,
Oh, so like kind of crypto Mormons, you mean? Like crypto Mormons? Yes, there were crypto Mormons. So one person, I don't have the picture here in this, his name was Armeneg Shilhagopian. He was a military doctor, an Ottoman military doctor. He was actually supported by the Ottoman government to go to the United States to go to medical school in Louisville, Kentucky. In 1903, 1904, I think, something right around that time, and able then to come back. He never told anybody in the broader community that he was Mormon, and he continued to practice that type of a situation. There were there's a couple of Arab Muslims who converted to Mormonism, but kept it quiet, helped, but to the rest of the world, they were Muslim for obvious reasons. And so, yeah, you had crypto Jews, crypto Christians, and why not crypto Mormons? Kind of situation small. If that answers your question. Yeah, definitely. Please.
We have another online question from Jennifer Manukian. Thank you for your talk. I'm curious if the memoir tells us about what drew Armenians in Zara until to Mormonism.
Yeah.
How did Mormon missionaries support them? Relatedly, did Mormon Armenians convert from evangelical Christianity or apostolic Christianity?
So some of them had. So I'm blanking on the exact names. There's some of them are blurring together, but there were Protestant missionaries in Zara as well. If I'm remembering correctly, Gagosian actually converted to Lutheranism at one point, but I might have that wrong. But there were some that had first converted to Protestantism and then went to Mormonism. Others, though, were part of the apostolic tradition. I haven't come across any that were distinctly Catholic Armenians at this point, but I haven't looked for that specifically. So I have to figure that out. There's more research to be done. I've been often asked if their situation was so bad as Mormon Armenians, then why in the world would they ever convert, right? And I think that's a problem with how historians think about things. We want material rationales. We don't always deal with the issues of faith very well or belief very well. I think at some point you have to take their word for it because they actually did sacrifice a whole heck of a lot to remain. Others didn't. So the very first convert, Armenian Ottoman convert, Vartugian, they left the church. They did not stay in the church. They did not continue being Mormon after a couple of years. But others did stay, and others gave up just about everything their whole life, these types of things for it. So, in their memoirs, they often talk about, many of them will talk about a religious conversion, some type of experience, whether it's, they would call, and Mormonism talks about, and I think broader Christianity has too, about a burning in the bosom, or a witness of the faith by the Holy Spirit. type of thing, or having visions or dreams. Joseph Smith came and talked to them in a dream, or these types of situations, and they wrote these types of things. And that can seem for academicians who are empirical based, where if they're not getting something out of it that's material, why would they do this? Well, there's people don't often act in rational ways in their best interests. So I think we got to take it seriously at some level through that. And it's interesting. I mean, there was some support for immigration that would come from the missionaries themselves to help them come, but the Mormon practice of the Perpetual Immigration Fund that I mentioned was done by 1887. And so, but you still had this encouragement by some to immigrate. And so, yes, you could get some support that way. And so that could be very enticing to some, but not everybody did that type of a situation. So, we have to, I think, be a little more open-minded as historians to why people would actually convert, take them seriously as a belief also. Somehow, I don't know how to measure it, but it's, there's something there. I think we have to consider.
Can I follow up?
Oh yeah, sure.
On that, because dreams is something I've been sort of interested in.
Oh yes, so we were chatting about this, weren't we?
So, I mean, no dream comes out of nowhere. So
I don't know. I have some really weird dreams.
Yeah.
Where did this come from? I'm sorry, I don't know.
That seems to suggest that we probably don't know exactly sort of how these missionaries were talking about this type of calling. I mean, were they feeding people ideas about how conversions come about?
I mean, Mormonism, if you go into its early traditions, it is based upon visions, dreams, angelic visitations, right? All of these notions of a restoration, as they call it, of the true gospel of Jesus, going back to Adam type of a situation, right? So it's, that is part and parcel, speaking in tongues. All of these types of evangelical side that we would label that are also in Mormonism as well at this point in time. I mean, Mormonism came out of the burned over district in upstate New York during that whole revivalism in the early 19th century. So, it's coming out of those traditions too. So yes, they were talking about those things, if that makes sense. Okay. There is. Yes, please.
Do you know what the status of Armenian converts are in Armenia today?
I don't.
Any kind of like continuity or connection between these early settlements and congregations?
Not that I have found, but I haven't looked at that. I as far as I'm aware, I've just read some short anecdotes about some folks after, from Aleppo going to different places in the 1950s, but I haven't traced those or followed those at all. I don't know. I know that the church sent missionaries there post Soviet era, when Armenia got its independence, these types of things from the Soviet Union and Russia, Russian Federation. And so they've had a presence there since the 1990s. I don't know of much in the way of continuity between those. I haven't seen it yet, at least. The people I run into are in Utah and those other areas. They are from the stock of early converts, primarily in the late Ottoman Empire. That's who they're tracing from Zara, Aintab, these prominent families that came over that I've mentioned. So sorry, I haven't done that work yet.
No, that's good.
Yes, please.
Oh,
You're making me sing for my supper tonight, aren't you?
Yeah. Like rapid firing questions.
No, it's fun.
Interesting.
It's a crazy topic. I mean,
Yeah.
that's like,
And it's a
who'd have thunk
totally
it?
different pivot, but like on the pivot to like a historical question. But since you mentioned, and I think a different part of it is that there were such good record keepers, and very different. I was like a working class type of person to be a record keeper of that time is a very rare, type of source to have. If during your research you found anything of interest in those primary sources that were unique, of like the genocide documentation or those early sources that were either unique or something that kind of goes contrarian to popular commentaries, or something that was something that stood out to you, or something that maybe I was thinking about that I really don't have any knowledge of, like particular gender role differences between Mormons in the Ottoman Empire versus Ottoman women or Armenian women in that period that maybe you might have come across?
So I'm trying to figure out how to frame this. So one of the richest diaries that I've come across is by Eric Sherinian. She wrote her diary, her draw at the behest of her grandchildren or whatever. Later in life, she's in her 80s in Utah, where she was living. She had immigrated when she was 14 or 15, I think, from Zara. And it is incredibly rich, particularly in the interpersonal, the family dynamics, who's doing what, her own story. It's richer than in those cases than I would say Hago Gagosians or the Aposhians or somebody, where there's so much really colorful detail. And I don't mean colorful as in like erratic or anything, but I just mean as in terms of there's a richness to it in terms of the interpersonal dynamics between different family members, marriages, crushes, these types of things with different people, which are really that you don't get in other places, that are really, really great. But she also goes into great detail about actually how they actually did the carpet weaving. The wool of the sheep were much better in Anatolia than they were in Utah. Better for dyeing, hold fast. And she wrote for 3 pages the process of how to do that. So this really rich description that you don't necessarily find, I haven't found elsewhere. And there's some very strict gender roles that are there. Arranged marriages still, even when they come to Utah. It's not that common in the early 20th century for arranged marriages among the Mormon communities in Utah, unless you're one of the splinter groups that are still practicing polygamy, right? So the Mormon Church outlawed polygamy in 1890 in part to get statehood in 1896 in the United States. You still had people practicing polygamy in the Mormon Church and still some secret marriages going on. Hinsey married his 4th wife in 1898, so kept it under wraps there. But you have this arranged types of marriages that were still happening among the Mormon Armenian and some with the Mormon Armenian community. They're coming. There was one example in particular of an orphaned convert who was kind of attached to a family who was older. One of the younger girls was forced to marry him. She was very unhappy that this came out in one of the memoirs, these types of things. So that still happened on certain levels. But I haven't done a systematic look at it, but they are really rich in terms of just understanding where people are coming from and the traditions, the foods they ate, the professions, how the family dynamics worked, who was, related on this side and who wasn't, and who got kicked out of this family and other things. So they're really rich in that regard. And they do give insights into the broader Armenian society, particularly among working class.
Good treasure trove.
It is. It really is. I mean, we're talking dozens of memoirs like this. It's not just a couple. So sorry. Go ahead. And then,
thank you very much. This is a very fascinating talk. So one element that I was curious about was this sort of socioeconomic standing of many of the Armenian converts to Mormonism. And going along with that, within these writings of the missionaries, if there was any intentionality, kind of the elements of Armenian society that would be most susceptible to the message, like what kind of occupations. I was curious if any of that was what you stumbled upon in your research.
I have not in such a pointed, intentional way. But and this is maybe from broader missionary ideas, whether it's broader Protestant or whatever. Some of the things I've read about looking at the notion that usually some of the people who are most willing to listen oftentimes to these new messages are the downtrodden, the people who have got less to lose because things are really tough for them and they're looking for answers. And if there's nothing that Mormonism does, it claims to have lots of answers, right? Where did we come from? Why are we here? Where are we going after this life? These types of things. They claim to have all those answers. And they claim to have a direct conduit to God to this day type of a situation. So can be very appealing also, I think, on many levels. And it also didn't really matter. You could be poor Armenian, but you could still be a child of God type of a situation. That could be very empowering to folks who are very downtrodden. So that's kind of a generalization. I haven't come across anything where Joseph Booth is scheming and Hinsey is scheming. Let's see, if we go to this, let's go find the most downtrodden and poorest. And, you know, I don't know. I didn't see anything like that. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay. You know. Oh, yeah.
When you were talking about these memoirs and these diaries, it sounds like it's almost its own particular genre.
Yeah.
Is it a Mormon genre that you are?
Oh, that's a good question.
In general, you know, there's many diaries and memoirs also of past.
Yeah.
American. But is there something specific about this Mormon memoir that as it links to genealogy?
You know, that's a great question. I have some initial responses, but I have to think about it more. So I'll just give you my initial reaction. Yeah. Yes, I think so, because there is very much intentionality in keeping your own journal, because you see it as a benefit for your posterity, right? It's intentionally supposed to be linking the generations together here. And you see this in a lot of those converts and the missionaries who remained faithful, who kept with it, they often will end their memoir with their testimonies, meaning, this is what I believe, this is who I am, this is what's important to me, this is what's guided to me, as a I don't know, miras, right? As an inheritance type of thing to their posterity. So I think there is something special to it. I hadn't thought of it in that way. Yeah. Oh, it is very much so. It's very much embedded in the church doctrines and where the church puts its resources. This notion of genealogy and connecting the generations together is one of what the church calls the threefold mission of it, right? The proselytizing, keeping the members faithful who are in, and redeeming, what they call redeeming the dead, hooking generations together. And so that's a lot. They put a lot of resources into that too. So it's, that's the materialist in me coming out, right? They're putting their money where their mouth is on that side. Yes, please.
Well, they believe in the baptism for the dead.
Yes.
They believe that's a moral obligation to baptize the dead.
For their own family. Yeah, for their own family members.
Well, no, universally. They baptized Jews who were Holocaust survivors.
Yeah, there was a controversy about that. Yeah,
there was a controversy that they had to leave those people be, but they believe that they have to baptize all of humankind. It's not just family members. Well, unless there's been some changes very recently.
So I'm just going by, doctrines.
The idea is that if people knew that baptism was necessary for salvation, then they would get it. And a lot of people haven't had the opportunity, but baptism is not necessary for salvation. That's a core doctrine.
That's a core doctrine of Mormonism.
It's believed by other Christians.
Yes.
Too, and I'm calling the Mormons Christians.
Okay.
They believe that people have not been, the baptism has to be performed, should be performed in this life.
Yes, the idea of by proxy, that's what their temples are for.
But it's not just limited to family members. It's beyond that. They baptize people that don't even know they're baptized. This may sound strange to you, but I'm speaking as a former member of the LDS, so I know what I'm talking about.
No, I'm not arguing with you on that. I just know that they may be more recent statements that
there may be,
particularly as a result, and I looked into this a little bit, as a result of the Holocaust victims that were somebody got it in their head to go and do that. That was seen as an aberration. What the official church stances are now,
changed.
Yeah, what they say now is that you do this for your own ancestors. Type of a situation. I don't speak for them. I'm not here to speak for them. I don't mean to do that. Yeah.
Before the controversy with the Holocaust survivors, that was the viewpoint.
Okay.
So I don't.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yes. Yes.
I have one more question online, and I think we should let you go after that. So this is on the map, you showed Gurun as part of the LDS Missionaries activity. So was there an actual temple there or any building identified with Mormons?
No, there was not. So there's two main buildings that Mormons have. There are churches, which they go to for Sunday worship and activities during the week. And then there's temples where they do eternal ordinances, salvation ordinances particularly for their ancestors, for those who are dead. But that's where you go and get a Mormon wedding to be sealed together. That's what's said. So there was never a church building or a temple built in the Ottoman Empire. They couldn't own property. They could rent space, and they would. Gurun had, I read in Joseph Booth's journals and other missionary journals, well, they would go on their way to Zara, stop in Gurun and preach there. And I think there was a couple families that lived there, but there was no congregation officially established in Gurun, if that makes sense. Did that answer that question? Okay. Yeah, but the main centers were Zara, Aintab, Maraş, Aleppo. Maraş, as far as I can tell, was completely wiped out as a result of the genocide. Aintab, there's some writings from the Ozunian family talking about how half of the membership died as a result of the deprivations of war there. Some of his accounts there, and then and Aleppo was mostly spared, and that's where the Booth came back in 1921 and brought the remainder of the converts and some of their relatives who weren't members, and they got a visas from the French there, and they did a self-proclaimed exodus to Aleppo, and they combined with the community there.
Sorry, Ken.
Oops. I know it shows a change in status of Mormons in the kind of the U.S. view at this point in time. Took 30 years to kind of reclaim that from 1890 when they renounced polygamy and to go forward. But it does show also the church itself donated enormous amounts of clothing, food, money for Near East relief. And so with that too, so Booth came in, with his pockets full to give too. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, no, I'm trying to dig. There's a lot to figure out here that I don't have the answers to yet. So,
was there a reason why they didn't go to the Northeast, like ours would this? Like, was it a governmental obstacle, or maybe like Protestants were stronger?
So as far as I know, every Mormon missionary that came to the Middle East always seemed to go take the train across Europe from through Bucharest down into the Orient Express through Berlin down to Constantinople, and then they took a ship from there into Alexandria. The centers, the largest communities were Aintab and Aleppo. And then they would go this way. They were all obsessed with going to the Holy Land. This was touristic proselyting. I don't know how else to say it, right? Touristic proselyting. They were all together. So Joseph Booth in 1902, when he came back for his second mission, brought a bicycle with him. And he rode his bike from Aintab to Aleppo to all the way down to Beirut, Damascus, and that way, it was just, it's not like your standard Mormon missionary with the white shirts and ties and name tags like you see today, right? This was the frontier folks, so to speak. There's great. I'm writing about this right now about his trick because he's being chased by gendarmes on horses and he can outride them. He's like, wow, out of here. And he goes into some of these small villages that never saw a bicycle, and folks are flinging stones at him as he's going through. He gets this big accident, and breaks his collarbone, all sorts of crazy things. So sorry, I didn't do it.
It seems to me that it maps real.
Eventually, yeah, you have the Damascus, you have the Hejaz Railway eventually. And it's towards the end. Yeah, towards the end, they are taking the trains. This is in the 1920s. Booth is talking about that. Beirut, Baalbek, going through those. But at this point, it's not really, they're not really taking it. They're going by carriage and buggy, Arabajah, taking those from Alexandretta in to these areas. And so they never got far east that I know of. It just wasn't something that really took them there. I've been asked, did they go among the Assyrian or Chaldean?
Yeah.
No, not that I could see, not that I could find. Just Armenians at this point. But they're so small in group and number. And, it was, they've got some pretty hair-raising stories about being held up on the side of the road, bandits and other things. But, it's, it's.
Sorry. but because when I'm thinking about the Germans talk with the Americans. So the Protestants, they're talking with each other, and the Americans are saying, okay, we're here and you should go there.
Okay, yeah.
So,
kind of split up things. Yeah.
But that doesn't seem to be the case here.
No, because they're invited out to Zara at first by some folks, like family members of early convert, and then they go out to Zara, and then they just kind of, hey, it works. And then they work their way to Aintab and Aleppo. These, I have to go back and figure out why they go where, but it's very clear that it's the central Anatolian and Levantine corridor that they're going to. That's where they're at. So kind of fun.
Thank you so much.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks for your engagement. This is really fun. This is very fun. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. Sincerely, really appreciate it.